Again, this could be an entire message, entire sermon, but the third final kind of source of that rejection is where you get to the place of reversal. So it's not just questioning God, it's not just doubting God, it's not just doing what you want to do and kind of hope God doesn't see. You kind of may know that it's wrong. The third place, the third step, is that complete reversal of God's way. And that's spoken of in Isaiah chapter 5. Check this out. It says this: "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, bitter for sweet, sweet for bitter. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and shrewd or clever in their own sight." See, that's now the cycle's complete. Now you have a complete reversal. And that's what I mean about when you distance yourself from God. And this is where the world rejoices in this, because they don't think they have to answer to God. If we get rid of God, then we can do what we want, what we see fit. At this point, man has placed himself in the seat of God, hasn't he? He's rejoicing in that. There's wide acceptance, and you see it. You see it permeate throughout wherever that is, where that time and that place, that society. There's wide acceptance. Wide acceptance of what God absolutely forbids. Right? Number two, you know that we're this place when what God calls sin is portrayed as a virtue. You're not just hiding in the darkness. You're not just sinning over there and hoping nobody finds out. That's kind of the second stage. You're still disobeying, but you're still kind of ashamed a little bit. You're not going to do that. Right now, at this point, it's just out there. Okay? That which God considers shameful is now a point of pride. Right? So again, what was in the shadows and the darkness, now it's out in the open. That's the reversal. That's where Jesus says, but the world will rejoice. They're going to be happy when they don't think they have to answer to me. If they think I'm dead, gone, it's over. So what's improper becomes proper. What's immoral becomes moral. What's wrong becomes right. And the opposite is true as well. So that which is actually proper in the sight of God is seen as improper. Right? Or that which is right in the sight of God is portrayed as wrong. So it's a double edge. It goes both ways in that regard. There's so many examples we can think of in this to speak to this, but I'm going to just use one from our current context to show you how the world rejoices when they don't believe they have to answer to God and the farther away they get from Him. So Jesus says, "You're going to lament and mourn when I'm gone, but the world is going to rejoice." So it wasn't just at that time they were standing up and cheering. It's all the time when they think they're away from God and that God doesn't see and they can do what they want, that they're going to rejoice. One illustration, there's so many examples, but let's just use one that's current in our culture. It's a very hot topic right now, and that's law enforcement. Okay? Law enforcement, in many ways, we talk about the reversal, is portrayed as criminal. And many criminals are portrayed simply as virtuous victims. Now, before anybody says anything or gets all upset, I am not saying that there are not crooked, unlawful officers. There are. I'm not saying that we don't need reform in certain areas. We do. Are there innocent victims of unrighteous police action? Yes, there are. But here's what I want you to really know and understand in terms of what we're talking about. There's a much deeper issue that illustrates this point of reversal, calling evil good and good evil. And that's when you hear the call for abolishment of civil authorities. When you hear that, and you see that's a spiritual level now. That's a lot deeper now. That's a hard attitude now. And when you see the level of disrespect and hatred towards those representing, towards the officers of the law, people going up to them with buckets of water and throwing them on them and humiliating them, when you see that kind of thing, when you hear the calls for abolishment of police, that shows something. That shows a disdain for God. That's the spiritual aspect of it. And why do I say that? Because it's God who ordains civil authority, right? It's God who puts those people in those places for a reason. They reflect. So civil authorities, they're to reflect the order that God gives. He's a God of order. They are to reflect the preservation of life. They are to restrain evil. They're there to protect the peace. And when people push that aside, you see, that's a disdain. That's a reflection on their heart towards God. That's a big deal. That's when you see that reversal coming into play. Reversal sows. It sows. It has its fruits. When you call evil good and good evil, when you substitute darkness for light, light for darkness, bitter for sweet, sweet for bitter, you get to that point where it's so, you see the fruit of that where you're living. Why? Because they rejoice. They rejoice at the death of God. And when they don't believe, they have to answer to God. So it sows confusion, disorder, division, and discord. It fosters partiality, inconsistent and arbitrary behavior. So you can have a person marching against racism, which is a good thing. Protest against racism, that's fine. But that same person during that protest may go into a building, take a $200 TV set, and walk out of there and not have a problem with it. You see, that's inconsistent. That's arbitrary. But that's what this sows, that kind of behavior. It's seen in the self-centered, self-indulgent, self-righteous attitudes that are around us. It promotes vengeance, retribution, intolerance, intimidation, and violence. It indulges in immorality, inappropriate, and what should be unacceptable behavior. Do you see what's happening? It calls these things, it portrays these things as good, as right, as proper, not just acceptable, but very normal. That's the foundation. When Jesus said, "But the world will rejoice," they're going to be rejoicing that. Why? Because they don't believe they have to answer to God and they can do what they want, what seems right in their own eyes. That's a spirit that permeates throughout the ages as you take the Lord out of the picture, out of the society. If God is dead, if Jesus went and stayed away, then so what? Right? Who's to say? Who's to determine what's right and what's wrong, good, bad, acceptable or unacceptable? Who does that? Man does that. Somebody does. The vacuum has to be filled by somebody. So it's man. If you get rid of God, it's going to be man who's going to set the rules, who's going to tell you what's right and what's wrong. And whoever can persuade the most people, whoever can impose their will upon them, well, then that's what goes. If there's no one to answer to, no one to judge, then who cares? That's why the world rejoices. You understand?